Normal is the most aptly named type in competitive Pokemon, an overall unexciting type compared to more fantastical concepts like Dragon or Ghost. Normal type attacks do not hit anything super effectively, and normal types also don't resist anything themselves. Normal types have two noteworthy properties. They are immune to Ghost and weak to fighting. Most normal types are not very successful in competitive, largely due to their typing not offering enough defensive benefit. But sometimes a largely neutral typing like normal can be a good fit on the right Pokemon. One of the most consistently high-performing Pokemon in competitive over the years has been Blissey, a simple normal type defensive special wall. With only a single weakness to fighting, this neutral defensive typing of normal allows Blissey's stats to do all the heavy lifting, and in this case, it works. Normal was also once a contender for best type in the game, interestingly. Gen 1 is a world where good attacking moves are scarce. Pretty much all the good physical attacks in the game are normal type attacks, like Body Slam and Hyper Beam. Fighting type attacks are also very rarely seen in Gen 1, so they have no weaknesses to really worry about. And they even have an immunity to the paralysis inflicting secondary effect from Body Slam, a property exclusive to normal types in Gen 1 specifically. Beyond Gen 1 though, normal is an average type overall, as you would expect. But some normal types do manage to excel competitively, despite their unexciting qualities. Let's explore relevant examples of normal types throughout the years in competitive Pokemon. But first, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that we can prevent the normal type Pokemon Smeargle from making a claim for the High Horse throne. Smeargle is still furious about the fact that he is not considered to be a horse, even though he can learn the move High Horsepower. Thank you. In Gen 1, normal types are on top of the world, arguably the best type in the whole game. The three big top-tier Pokemon that are seen on the vast majority of competitive teams are normal types. Tauros, Snorlax, and Chansey here. Normal is great offensively and defensively in this generation, with stab damage on Body Slam and Hyper Beam being extremely valuable. Defensively, they're also great because nothing really hits them super effectively except fighting, and there are no good fighting types in this generation. Maybe Machamp, maybe Poliwrath, but those are very rarely seen and not very good or consistent. And fighting type attacks for coverage also extremely uncommon because there just aren't any good ones. There's like low kick or submission, which both suck. Normal type attacks on the other hand are excellent, with Body Slam and Hyper Beam being chief among them. Many non-normal types use these moves anyway, just because they're that good. And Tauros is a supreme abuser of these options, as a extremely fast and offensively threatening normal type and the premier offensive generator of this format, and often a late game cleaner. The whole game plan of Gen 1 is usually to set up for your Tauros to sweep in an endgame situation. Tauros also happens to be blessed with great options for the few things that can switch in against normal types. Rhydon is a common ground rock type Pokemon who can shrug off this normal type damage very well, but you have Blizzard for super effective ice type damage against Rhydon, and other applications like nice damage against Exeggutor and the chance to freeze, which does come up sometimes. And you also have Earthquake, which can hit Gengar. Gengar is of course the only ghost type, and it is immune to normal, but Earthquake is super effective against Gengar's poison typing, so that is really useful too. Tauros also has some other useful coverage options to help it out. Thunderbolt is a pretty popular one to hit Cloyster, a very strong defensive wall with a massive base defense stat. Even though it doesn't resist normal, it can shrug off moves like Body Slam and Hyper Beam. Thunderbolt will deal super effective damage to Cloyster. These Gen 1 move pools are really something, folks. How does it make sense that Tauros can call upon a Blizzard and a Thunderbolt to deal elemental damage? I don't know, but we don't ask questions about such things, do we? That's just how it is. Another option you can see on Tauros sometimes is Fire Blast, which actually has a 30% chance to burn in Generation 1, which can be useful against sometimes Snorlax. Because normal types have that property of being immune to the Body Slam paralysis effect, sometimes enemy normal types are actually the most consistent way to handle normal type attacks, because you are not worried at all about getting paralyzed, which can disrupt you and lower your speed and all those unfortunate side effects. So ever since that mechanical discovery was implemented on simulators, we saw a rise in Reflect on normal types to handle Tauros and Snorlax. So Fire Blast having a burn chance can be nice on an incoming Snorlax, one of the few ways to actually deal lasting damage or cripple it in some way from Tauros, so that's also interesting. Tauros is a pretty simple Pokemon in Gen 1, but it kind of represents the most powerful concepts in Gen 1, which is, you know, clicking Hyper Beam. Snorlax, yet another central Pokemon in Gen 1, and we can see why. Another normal type with access to the good old Body Slam and Hyper Beam, which are ever valuable, with stab damage on them. But Snorlax is one of the more versatile central threats construct in Gen 1 with a lot of different options that you can mix and match on it. Snorlax has access to self-destruct, which is really powerful with stab damage on it. Sacrificing yourself to just deal a big hit to the enemy and trade with something important, that's something that Snorlax has up its sleeve. Snorlax is incredibly defensively solid with a massive HP stat, and it can abuse Reflect to actually be pretty effective into enemy Snorlax and Tauros. Reflect in Gen 1 is a more permanent effect that doubles your defense as you stay in. It will go away when you switch out, similar to a stat change, but it's very different to modern Reflect, which is a screen effect that lasts for 5 turns. This is an effect that remains on your Pokemon until you switch out. A very good move in the metagame. But Snorlax has more up its sleeve. Ice Beam is a popular option, not only for special attacking coverage, but also for the freeze chance. Sometimes in Gen 1 you're in these situations where 2 walls are kind of just sitting there and neither one can really break through one another, so you fish for the Ice Beam freeze. Eventually it'll come, and then they will be completely ruined. You of course cannot thaw out in Gen 1 naturally. The only way to thaw is getting hit by a fire type attack, which is not going to happen too often, is it? So getting a freeze is massively impactful in Gen 1 and is effectively a Pokemon KO because they can't do anything anymore. So even Snorlax can just sit there fishing for Ice Beam freezes in certain positions. Snorlax can also use Amnesia to boost its special stat. Doesn't have the best special stat in Gen 1, only 65, but with boosts it will not only be safe from incoming special attacks with a higher special stat, but the special stat also increases your special attacking damage. So Ice Beam or Blizzard will hit really hard. You can sometimes even use Surf if you want a way to do even more damage to Rhydon, who can sometimes be a tough matchup for you. Snorlax also has access to Rest, and that's obviously a high value thing to do on something so bulky, healing it up. Also healing any status ailments that may be on Snorlax. And you of course have Earthquake as well as a way to hit Gengar, who otherwise completely walls you if you're running only normal type of attacks, which Snorlax commonly does with its many utility options it wants. It can't always fit coverage attacks, but Earthquake is a common option that will hit an incoming Gengar. And of course there is Chansey, the final member of the big 3, though people are telling me that it's more of the big 2 these days. Chansey is not quite on the level of Tauros and Snorlax, but I think if there's a gap between them, it's a pretty small one. Chansey is of course on just about every team. I guess if you're going to drop any of the big 3, Chansey would be the one to drop, but it is still seen on the vast majority of competitive teams, and it is an absolutely central Pokemon for the format. Chansey, unlike the other 2 though, is not using its normal typing for any offensive advantage, because its attack stat is a measly 5. Instead, the normal typing is much more of a defensive benefit for Chansey, and that's all you need on a Pokemon like this, with a monstrous HP stat of 250, an absurd HP stat, and a great special stat of 105. This is one of the best defensive Pokemon in the format. Unlike Snorlax, Chansey also has a reliable form of healing in the form of Soft Boiled, which simply heals you directly, and that is a massive deal. Chansey also has quite a bit of set variety compared to its foes, with a lot of utility options you can mix and match. Something like this is quite common: Thunderbolt and Ice Beam. Thunderbolt is pretty good right now because Starmie is very popular, and dealing super effective damage to Starmie is good. Also hits some other targets like Cloyster. And Ice Beam not only just is a good special attack, I mean your special stat is pretty nice, but Ice Beam has that freeze chance, so against a non-statused enemy Chansey, you could actually get paralyzed on purpose on your Chansey so that you can't get frozen and then just sit there Ice Beaming them. And if they ever choose to sit there and play that 1v1, eventually that freeze will come and they're going to regret ever doing so. Much like Snorlax, you can also go Reflect on Chansey, allowing it to operate well into enemy Snorlax and Tauros, shrugging off the body slam damage and never worried about the paralysis, of course, because it is immune to being paralyzed by body slam. This has been a pretty popular option. Thunder Wave is a staple of Chansey, one of the best ways that it can just cripple enemy attackers. If you land a Thunder Wave on something like Tauros, that is enormous. It can be game winning to do so. Another status option you could consider on Chansey is Sing, an inaccurate sleep-inflicting move, but Chansey has the bulk to afford a miss or 2 before this eventually lands, and putting a Pokemon to sleep is one of the highest impact things you can do, completely preventing them from acting for multiple turns. A very good option. Another option on Chansey that you can use is Counter, which is a weird move in Gen 1. In most gens, Counter is a way to play around physical attacks incoming. You deal damage back that is double the damage you took from a physical hit. But in Gen 1, it only works on normal and fighting type attacks specifically. So attacks like Earthquake or Drill Peck cannot be countered. I'm not sure why. It's some sort of programming quirk or something like that. Luckily for Chansey, the majority of physical attacks in this format are normal, as we have established, but you can play around Chansey's counter with moves like Earthquake and Drill Peck on Tauros or whoever else. But it can still be good. And you could also store counter in a weird way in Gen 1. There's a unique mechanic where if you take a body slam, for example, and then they switch out, you can use counter and it will deal damage based on the body slam you took last turn. As long as they don't actually perform an action and they switch instead, you can still do the counter damage from the move that you took last turn. It's very strange, but it's the truth. It's the cold hard truth. And of course you can also run a Seismic Toss if you prefer a consistent way to deal damage. Just deals damage based on your own level. So it will do a clean 100 to everything. I think Thunderbolt seems more popular now though, because this also does pretty good damage to most things while also helping you out against Starmie. Generally better, but Seismic Toss also has its uses, of course. Outside of those big 3 normal types, there aren't any other OU ranked normal types, but there are some that you do see in competitive play with niche uses, and I think the most common of the niche normal types would be Persian, who is kind of like a second Tauros. It's very similar in what it does, but Persian has a little bit going for it that Tauros does not. A way lower attack stat, notably, but a way higher speed stat. And as we know in Gen 1, speed correlates with crit chance. And Persian has this move right here, Slash, which has a high critical hit ratio. So Persian actually has a really, really good chance to crit, and is quite consistent at breaking through Reflect because of that, because crits ignore the defense boost from Reflect. So that's a pretty nice way to counteract that common form of counterplay to normal type spam. Persian also has Hyper Beam on it, which we know is a great move. And even though it's not the best option in the world, you do have Bubble Beam as a way to apply some pressure to Rhydon, so Rhydon doesn't completely wall you. If not for this, Rhydon would be a complete hard counter to Persian, but no, it's got Bubble Beam on it. Also, you have Thunderbolt to threaten Cloyster, who is a common physical wall. Your special stat is unimpressive though, so that's something to consider, but at least you have such options. Porygon is an interesting one. This was prior to the release of Porygon 2, one of the most well-received sequels in human history, but Porygon 1 exists in Generation 1. And this is kind of like the same way that Persian is a mini Tauros. This is kind of like a mini Chansey. It's a mono-normal type with access to Recover, which is really good, even better than Soft-Boiled, because it has way higher PP, which is quite relevant. And despite having terrible stats, Porygon does the job at switching in against Snorlax, and actually 1v1ing it pretty consistently, which is interesting. I believe Body Slam is a 3-hit KO against Porygon, so you can Thunder Wave them for the disruption effect and just sit there recovering against them repeatedly until they eventually run out of Body Slams if they choose to keep doing it, and you can just chip away at them with little jabs like from Thunderbolt or Ice Beam. Maybe force them to rest, which leaves them vulnerable, and you can bring something else in to punish them. So that's a pretty decent niche. A reliable switch in that takes some pressure off your other Pokemon in terms of answering Snorlax, and it might seem very specific that you're only good against Snorlax really, but Snorlax is on literally every competitive team, so that's not too bad. Unfortunately though, Porygon is not very good against Amnesia Snorlax, because Amnesia Snorlax deals special damage and scales up, so eventually Amnesia will out-damage the amount that you can heal, and you will not effectively 1v1 it, so that sucks. Amnesia is one of the less common Snorlax sets though, but still, that can get you. And there are some decent moveset options available to you. Thunder Wave obviously and Recover are basically mandatory on the guy, but you can do Reflect if you want to be even more solid against Snorlax. It's not too necessary because they can only 3-hit KO you, and you are also immune to getting paralyzed. But if you just want to further your solidness against certain things, and maybe this would make you better against Tauros or something. Not sure how that 1v1 plays out. They probably do too much damage to you, I would imagine. I think you could probably consider Psychic as well, just for the special drop chance, which does give you some sort of 1v1 potential. You can eventually start dealing pretty big hits to Snorlax, and the rest sets won't be as much of a problem. Porygon itself could 1v1 them with enough special drops. Ice Beam is generally quite nice as well to fish for freeze chances against Snorlax, and even could work against other passive enemies like Chansey. And of course we have Ratok, one of the premier rat Pokemon ever designed, who is also kind of just like another Tauros, but this one is very unimpressive. These stats are not very good, but it's still a normal type with Body Slam and Hyper Beam, so that's pretty inherently decent in Gen 1. And Raticate also has the interesting option of Super Fang, which deals a flat half of a target's current HP, and it can hit ghosts. This is kind of useful to put other Pokemon into Hyper Beam range, not only for you, but for like your teammates like Tauros. This can result in you dealing pretty good damage to specific things that Tauros or Persian couldn't. But yeah, obviously very unimpressive. Only 50 special, so you do have Bubble Beam, but that's probably not too threatening to ride on, I would imagine. I've just pulled up the calculator out of curiosity, and to Raticate's credit, if you do Super Fang and then Bubble Beam against Rhydon, it probably 2-hit KOs. There's got a good chance. 48 to 57% damage on Bubble Beam here is the roll. That's not terrible. Off the back of a Super Fang chip. So there you go, Raticate. You got that going for you. And there is, of course, Dodrio, my favorite Pokemon of all time. If you didn't know, folks, I'm a big fan of Dodrio. I like it. It's 3-headed. 3 heads are better than 1, people tell me. But Dodrio is pretty unfortunate in Gen 1. It's okay, but the issue with it is that unlike the other Tauros-esque Pokemon, this guy does not have a great way to hit Rhydon. Doesn't have any water-type coverage. I wonder if this would be OU if it did have Bubble Beam or something like the others do, because its stats are actually quite impressive. It's got base 100 speed, 110 attack as well, which is higher than Tauros, and even has agility, which the others don't, for a speed boost. So Dodrio, if you do eliminate Rhydon, can be pretty good, but that's a lot to ask, of course. Dodrio also has an interesting interaction, I believe, against a Jinx lead. You outspeed them, and your Hyper Beam has a pretty good chance to actually just outright KO them, because Hyper Beam itself has like a 40-ish% roll to one-hit KO naturally, and then because of your speed stat, there's also a crit chance on top of that that increases the odds. So that is a bit of like a gamble, though. You're just hoping that it does KO when sometimes it doesn't. But hey, if you do land that and you just KO Jinx in the first turn of the game, that's a Pokemon KO to start things off. That's kind of cool. So there you go. Jinx, one of the most common leads in Gen 1, so can be a bit of a Jinx anti-lead with that particular interaction there. That's something. Drill Peck is also pretty nice stab to play around like Chansey Counter, and also do quite good damage to Exeggutor. None of the other normal types have this, so that's something to consider. But overall, I probably would not use Dodrio in Gen 1, just because it not being able to hit Rhydon is such a disaster for it. But an honorable Pokemon and a hard-working Pokemon with 3 minds at work. 3 heads are better than 1. It's true. By the way, folks, forgive me if I've gotten anything wrong in the Gen 1 section here. Some of you get very upset that I get mechanics wrong in Gen 1. Every single time I talk about Gen 1, I get some little thing wrong, because it's a very unique gen where there's just little things I miss. So forgive me, folks. Just let me know, and I'm going to add to the knowledge base, and we can learn together, can't we? We can iterate upon each other. In Generation 2, the most central Pokemon in the entire game is a normal type. And Snorlax was already excellent in Gen 1 and a auto-include on teams, but in Gen 2 it is a cut above. It is even better. In fact, this is the most powerful Pokemon in any OU format ever, relatively. And not having a Snorlax on your team is an active disadvantage you're putting yourself in. Doesn't really have much to do with the fact that Snorlax is a normal type. It's pretty good on a Pokemon with this bulk, though, to just be neutrally good against most things, and let your high HP and special defense do all the work. But being weak to fighting is an actual thing now, because Machamp is a real Pokemon who has real moves, which was not the case last generation. But overall, you do kind of like being a normal type. If you were any other type, you would have weaknesses that can be targeted. But because you're a normal type, you only have one weakness to worry about, which can be easily patched up by teammates. So that's something. Snorlax is of course so good because it just benefited from many new mechanics introduced in Gen 2. Leftovers being a big one. You get a percentage of your health every turn in passive healing, which is fantastic with such a high HP stat here, of course. You get the new move Curse, which boosts your attack and defense, lowers your speed. Your speed sucks anyway. Boosting attack and defense, excellent. Curse Lack's famously difficult to really KO once it gets moving with the Curse boosts, because its special defense is through the roof, and if you can patch up the one lower stat it has, which is defense, how do you beat the thing? It's got all the defenses in the world, it's got 1,000,000 HP, and then it's also defeating you with massive damage off a massive attack stat, so what's to be done? A typical Curse-like set is something like this: Curse, Double-Edged Earthquake, Rest, but Snorlax is unbelievably versatile in Gen 2. It has so many options. You could do Sleep Talk if you want to be more proactive while resting, while sleeping, and Sleep Talk is also a mechanic that Snorlax benefits from that's new to Gen 2, allowing Snorlax to actually do stuff while it's sleeping is huge, because otherwise it would be a little bit more exploitable. Often rest Sleep Talk sets with Snorlax just take advantage of the bulk of the thing and run maybe 2 attacks like this, and you can really mix and match your options. Surf can be used to hit Golem and Rhydon, or Fire Blast or Flamethrower can be used to hit steel types that come in to try and answer you, like Skarmory and Forretress and other such fellows. You can go in a completely aggressive direction with Snorlax and just run 4 attacks, just try to KO as many things as you can. Thunder is actually quite a nice option to hit Cloyster. Cloyster also got a significant buff in Gen 2, gaining options like Spikes and Rapid Spin, so being able to hit Cloyster is a big deal. Otherwise, a pretty good answer to Snorlax with its high defense, but Thunder turns the tables on it. If you want to go insanely aggressive, you can go Belly Drum Snorlax. This, of course, comes with the significant cost of halving your HP stat, but you maximize your attack stat, setting it to +6 no matter what. Even if your attack has been lowered, it gets set to maximum no matter where you are, which means you can basically defeat anybody in the entire world. By modern tiering standards, Snorlax would probably be banned because it is so overwhelming and central, but the metagame has just been forced to adapt to Snorlax for so many years that if you did ban Snorlax now, it would basically upheave everything and turn Gen 2 into a different game. Because Snorlax is basically Gen 2. It's the central force. And that's kind of a good thing, because if Snorlax was banned, I think it would be a worse metagame. It would center around Zapdos instead, who is more passive and less varied. Snorlax offers a bit more variety than other top tiers do, I think. Like the other top tiers are Zapdos, Raikou, and Cloyster, who have some variety but not nearly as much as Snorlax does, so probably a good thing for the metagame overall that Snorlax is legal. Blissey was also introduced in Gen 2, a staple from here on out in competitive Pokemon. A new evolution for Chansey that operates in very much the same way, but it's even better. It has higher HP, higher special defense. It was already great, and it's got a decent special attack stat. Last generation, of course, these two stats were combined as the special stat, so in a way this is even worse than Gen 1 Chansey, because Gen 1 Chansey had like 100 or so in both special defense and special attack effectively, but overall Blissey is superior, of course. Not my favorite Pokemon to use in Gen 2 just because it is so passive and defensive. Like, if you're choosing to use Blissey, you are committing to games taking hours and hours, honestly, but it is like the best special wall in Pokemon history. It's even used in Ubers frequently throughout the generations, even in modern times, for its ability to just really reliably answer special attackers, especially hard-hitting ones like Miraidon or Kyogre in future games. Can't really do much damage to Blissey. I mean, look at these stats. It was made for this specific purpose. It can heal reliably. It has the utility of Heal Bell. I've actually even seen Light Screen on Blissey in Gen 2 as a way to support your teammates and help them against incoming special hits. Miltank was also introduced in Gen 2, controversially, a cow-themed Pokemon, and it's ranked in OU. Let's go Miltank. This is the only gen where Miltank is OU, regrettably, but pretty good normal type mixed wall. It's got decent enough stats for the generation. It's uncharacteristically fast for like mostly a defensive utility Pokemon. Base 100 is quite good. And Miltank has the unique ability to actually 1v1 Snorlax quite well, because it can just growl at it, lowering its attack and basically preventing it from overwhelming you with Curse. And because Growl has a 61 PP, if they want to sit there and Curse, matching your growls every time, they will lose eventually and run out of curses. So that's fun. You also have Milk Drink. You got Stab, Body Slam, decent enough attack. You can spread Paralysis, and you got Heal Bell as well. Great utility. I think if it's between Miltank and Blissey in Gen 2, I would rather use Miltank. I think it's a bit more proactive, a bit more fun, but they do have their own individual uses in it, pros and cons, of course. Smeagol also exists in Generation 2 and would go on to be one of the best miscellaneous utility Pokemon in competitive. Its stats are unimpressive, but it has the signature move Sketch, which allows it to permanently copy an enemy Pokemon's move for itself. So effectively, Smeagol can learn any move in the entire game, which is very useful, evidently. Allows you to use any combination of utility or whatever the hell you need to fill gaps on a team. Commonly in Gen 2, it is used for Spore, which is a sought-after utility option, usually on pretty bad Pokemon, but Smeagol can just take it for itself with Sketch, and that's one of the staples of Smeagol throughout the generations. Pretty much every Smeagol set is using Spore, or the majority throughout the years, just because it's so good, 100% accurate sleep inflicting. And then you can make spikes with it, is a common thing to do. I suppose Sacred Fire is pretty nice in Gen 2, a 50% burn inflicting attack can allow Smeagol to have a bit more value beyond that. And Smeagol has also been used on Baton Baton Pass strategies throughout the years. There was actually quite a controversial strategy that used Spider Web, which prevents the target from switching out, and Baton Pass, which actually maintains that effect on the enemy. So if you Spider Web them and Baton Pass to like Umbreon, for example, they still can't switch out. They're still trapped. So you could actually just trap a guy and then Baton Pass between multiple fellows. And what you would do is actually lower their stats to the minimum possible with effects like Sand Attack and Charm to just reduce them to a useless guy sitting there. And then when they're completely unable to do any damage to you or touch you, you go to like Growth Jolteon and just maximize your special attack completely and then sweep everything. So that was obviously game breaking and very unhealthy. So this combination is banned of Spiderweb and Baton Pass. That's also true in Gen 3, where it had similar game-breaking possibilities. But you can also do, like, Agility Baton Pass is something. The Agility Pass to, like, Belly Drum Snorlax or something like that. I believe Baton Pass still sees occasional uses on Gen 2 teams. Clefable also exists, and it can use Belly Drum now, which gives it something to do, with Stab Return and Fire Blast for good coverage to hit Steel types. It's also got Healing from Moonlight. I mean, this is sort of usable. Its stats are unimpressive though, and it does have competition in this department. It's faster than Snorlax, notably, so that's something, and it hits a bit harder with Fire Blast than Snorlax does, which is also something. And Kangaskhan can kind of be like a secondary Snorlax in this generation as well. It's not as good, worse stats overall, but they're actually decent, aren't they? 105 HP, pretty good attack, serviceable defenses, higher speed than Snorlax, that's something. And it has Curse to boost up, operate kind of like the Curse Snorlax sets do, and it has Roar, which Snorlax does not have. So this can sometimes be used to 1v1 enemy Snorlax by you curse alongside them, you have defense, you're faster, and then you roll them away. They lose all their boosts, but you keep all your boosts. An interesting way to take advantage of Snorlax, perhaps. Normal typing in Gen 3 still feels okay, as you would expect. It feels normal, but there are more fighting types to worry about now, with Heracross and Breloom being relevant members of the metagame, fighting coverage rising generally, and also your Ghost immunity does come up a bit more, but regrettably, Ghost coverage is often paired with fighting coverage on Pokemon like Medicham and Hariyama, so even if you can pivot in on Ghost type attack sometimes, usually you're threatened by the follow-up fighting type attack after that, so not the safest thing in the world. But for Pokemon like Blissey here, as mentioned in the intro of this video, normal typing is a great fit on something with absurd stats that can do most of the heavy lifting in terms of living the hits you need to live, and Blissey is definitely way better in Gen 3 than it was in its debut game of Gen 2. It now has the ability Natural Cure, which is a fantastic new ability, giving it a way to cure status ailments. If it switches out, it cures whatever status ailment it has on it, which is extremely valuable on a defensive Pokemon that tends to be under fire from things like Toxic. So that's massive, and there are just more special threats to worry about in this world. Zapdos, Moltres, Starmie, Gengar. Blissey is the most consistent answer to all of them in one, and it even helps against physical threats. Blissey is bulky enough, and with defensive Vs invested in it, to live a lot of common physical hits too, and often cripple whatever's trying to attack it, like Salamence. Can't quite one-hit Blissey after it Dragon Dances, and you can hit him with the follow-up Ice Beam or Thunder Wave to totally ruin their day. What's interesting about Blissey is that in Gen 3, it usually needs to run special attack investment, primarily so that Ice Beam does enough damage to one-hit Dugtrio. Otherwise, Blissey would get totally destroyed by Dugtrio. And Blissey uses its special attack and special coverage quite a lot in Gen 3, which makes it quite fun to use. It can actually feel like an offensive threat sometimes. One of my favorite Blissey sets is this one. Ice Beam, Thunderbolt, and Toxic. For the Bolt Beam combo, I mean, this is pretty nice, because you can actually Toxic an enemy Blissey, meaning they can't stay in forever, and then nothing loves coming in on this combo, especially when you have a modest nature and plus special attack. You can actually deal almost half health to an incoming Skarmory, you can hit like incoming Celebi really massively. Flamethrower is another cool option, which can catch incoming Metagross. Metagross commonly comes in on Blissey because it's immune to Toxic and resists Ice Beam, and threatens Blissey with big physical damage, but Flamethrower totally deals unexpected damage to them. Flamethrower is also great against Forretress and Skarmory too, if you want to hit that. If you want to go crazier, you can do Fire Blast for even more damage. And Blissey has a reputation of being kind of a lame defensive Pokemon, but in Gen 3, I think it's actually quite fun to use and so interesting in all the variety it can have in its movesets, like with something like Fire Blast being a valid option on it. And there's other options you can mix and match, of course. Sometimes teams go for Calm Mind Blissey. No utility moves at all, just Calm Mind and using using Blissey as a team's main win condition, which can be an interesting choice on like generally more defensive teams. This can 1v1 enemy Carmine Pokemon a lot of the time, like Suicune, because you match their boosts. And you're bulkier, and you have Thunderbolt, which hits them super effectively. Won't work against raw Suicune, but will against other Suicunes. This is a fun set, and Blissey has options such as Counter, which can allow you to catch off guard a Metagross or Snorlax or something trying to hit you with big physical damage, or Swampert Earthquake. You just hit them with the surprise counter, which can leave them in disaster territory much of the time. The other thing about Blissey is that in this world where Tyranitar is so central and Sandstorm is up in most games, it usually isn't using its leftovers healing because it's cancelled out by the Sandstorm damage, which I think is a good thing, preventing Blissey from being too annoying to deal with and chip healing absurd amounts, because chip heal is very valuable on Blissey with its enormous base HP stat. But cutting chip healing from walls like this is one of the reasons that Blissey is actually manageable to deal with. Also under fire from spikes, which apply big pressure to it, as it is often a team's main switch into special threats, so it is forced in repeatedly. There are also mechanics like Focus Punch that can punish incoming Blissey or punish it for using a healing or status move itself. So I really enjoy what Blissey provides to Gen 3. Not only the team building variety within its moveset options, but also the way that you play around it feels pretty fun. You can lure it in and sort of beat it down in multiple ways. Sometimes you have a team that just aims to reliably eliminate Blissey using Dugtrio that is specifically EV'd for Blissey, and that's the way you handle Blissey. Sometimes it's more subtle, like you want to beat it over a longer period of time with, little gradual chip damage. And sometimes you can run something like a Focus Punch Swampert to catch them trying to Toxic you, which they commonly do, and just smack them for big damage. Substitute Jirachi can defeat Blissey by playing around its Seismic Toss. So there's many ways to defeat Blissey, many ways to use Blissey. And it's a cool central defensive Pokemon in the format, in my humble opinion. Snorlax is also still OU ranked, but far from as powerful as it once was in Gen 1 and 2. Snorlax is feeling severely limited now, and all the fundamentally strong qualities of Snorlax are still here, of course. The normal typing is a good fit on something with these stats. Being neutral to most things is nice, and the stats are still very, very excellent. But what's rough about Snorlax is that it really sucks against sand and spikes, and unlike Blissey, who has soft-boiled at least to reliably heal itself back up, and Natural Cure to heal up from status ailments that apply pressure to Blissey, Snorlax has no reliable form of healing. It only has a rest, which is obviously very exploitable and leaves you vulnerable. So Snorlax is limited in the amount that it can actually operate as a wall. Whereas in Gen 2, Snorlax could heal ridiculous amounts with leftovers chip healing, which just is so valuable on something with such high health. And Rest Talk, allowing you to not only heal with rest itself, but operate quite well while sleeping, because Sleep Talk could call rest in Gen 2, allowing you to heal again. That made Snorlax more consistent. Not the case anymore in Gen 3, regrettably. And there are more Pokemon in the game that give you problems, like Skarmory. Existed in Gen 2, but now Skarmory is significantly buffed. It has spikes, which are the primary mechanic the Gen 3 centers around. So Skarmory just eats Snorlax alive, switches in and uses it as an opportunity to set its spikes, which you do not love. Snorlax also has some problems against Gengar. It has Shadow Ball for coverage, but it's vulnerable to Will-O-Wisp, and it is scared to ever click Body Slam or Self-Destruct, allowing Gengar onto the field. Gengar also has Levitate now, so Earthquake won't hit Gengar like it used to. So Snorlax often requires a lot of support, usually from Magneton to eliminate Skarmory, sometimes even from Pursuit Tyranitar to eliminate Gengar, and sometimes even on top of that you want Weather Clear to allow Snorlax to actually heal with leftovers. But that legendary level threat is still locked in there somewhere. If you can overcome all those things and get rid of their Skarmory, get rid of the Sandstorm, and then start cursing up and defeating everything, Snorlax remains an extremely powerful win condition in this format, and one of the best things to build a team around and support. Because when you support it, it is a monster. It is one of the strongest and scariest things in the format, if it can overcome all of its hurdles, which your teammates can help you do. So for that reason, Snorlax is still something that you absolutely need a plan against. You absolutely need to consider it, but yeah, not the auto-include monster that it once was in the previous two generations, of course. And then there's Smeagol, who was introduced in Gen 2, but feels much, much better in Gen 3 with so many more things to take advantage of from Sketch. An aggressive Pokemon with Spore generally feels better in Gen 3 because Sleep Talk is no longer a central mechanic. In Gen 2 there's plenty of Pokemon that don't mind being put to sleep, because that's what they do anyway, but not the case in Gen 3 anymore, so Spore is more impactful, Spikes are more impactful, you have new options like Will-O-Wisp that you can take advantage of, and Smeargle is one of the best offensive Spikes Pokemon. Spore and Spikes on the same Pokemon is truly excellent for teams that are just hyper aggressive and want to set spikes and then go in with their threats as quickly as possible. Smeargle is a perfect fit on those teams and perhaps the best aggressive spiker on teams like that. I think Smeargle deserves OU status, to be honest. I think it is a cornerstone of Spike's hyper offense, which is, in my opinion, quite a good and popular archetype among great players. Smeargle also has some occasional application beyond that, with sets like Dragon Dance Baton Pass and Tail Glow Baton Pass. Those I don't value as highly. I think they're a bit inconsistent, but this set right here, or sets similar to this with whatever utility you need, like Thunder Wave is pretty high impact. Usually they run Explosion for the disruption effect. Yeah, I think Smeargle is pretty great overall. Its normal typing isn't really a factor though. Smeargle could be any type. Its type doesn't really matter, it's more the fact that it learns all the moves in the game. That's the thing that makes Smeargle good. If Smeargle was a bug type, it would operate the same. I guess Stab on Explosion is the one thing that provides, which is a pretty considerable damage increase, which you need, because you have no attack. But other than that, there's not really much benefit to specifically being a normal type. And in fact, leaves you vulnerable to fighting type attacks, which are common on leads. So can be a problem sometimes. Yeah. Porygon 2 just dropped, folks. Just kidding. It dropped last generation, but really came into its own in Gen 3 after it gained the ability Trace, which is maybe my favorite ability in Pokemon. I love it. It's got so many cool applications. Trace simply, on switch-in, copies the enemy's ability, which has a lot of cool ways to be used. You can switch in against Flygon or Claydol and copy their Levitate, granting you complete immunity to their Earthquake. You can switch in against Jolteon, become immune to their Electric thanks to copying Volt Absorb, but most importantly, Porygon 2 is able to trace Dugtrio's ability Arena Trap, which traps the enemy Pokemon. So Porygon 2 can actually counter-trap Dugtrio. Dugtrio can't switch out, and you can actually just recover repeatedly until they run out of Earthquakes or whatever else they've locked into, or just Ice Beam them if they're low enough, and eliminate Dugtrio, which is actually a great enabler for many styles of teams. Dugtrio is a central Pokemon in the game that shuts down a lot of powerful fellows that would otherwise be quite viable, like Raikou. Raikou is pretty strong, but unfortunately it is slower than Dugtrio and gets eliminated by Earthquake, so that's a big problem for Raikou. Same with something like Jirachi, for a more top-tier example. Jirachi is extremely powerful, but it's always a little bit scared of Dugtrio, who can finish it off if it's low health, sometimes even one-hit it if it's a more aggressive set. So Porygon 2, alongside Dugtrio vulnerable Pokemon, is a great choice. It's something you can build around. And Porygon 2 itself is a pretty solid mixed wall. Has decent enough stats and access to Recover, the utility of Thunder Wave, and Ice Beam is able to allow you to check Salamence very well. You can shrug off just about everything that they do, except maybe like Choice Band Brick Break, but mixed attacking Salamence Brick Break doesn't hit you for that much damage, and you can KO them in one hit with the super effective Ice Beam. Thunderbolt lets you hit Skarmory. Gyarados is a good one. It's pretty hard to check Gyarados consistently, actually. A lot of common physical attacking answers have trouble against Gyarados, but not Porygon 2. You can just hit them with a big Thunderbolt and they die in a single hit to that. I like to run Toxic on some Porygon 2 sets to be able to hit Swampert with something. Alternatively, you can even run Hidden Power Grass if you want to hit Swampert even harder. I quite like this option. Yeah, one of my favorite Pokemon of all time, Porygon 2. A beautiful Pokemon design. So many cool ways to use this thing. And an important tool to have in this metagame, where Dugtrio can sometimes cause a lot of problems. But because of Porygon 2, Dugtrio is never going to be like that much of an issue, because there's just this hard counter to it that it can in fact take advantage of it. I love this kind of anti-meta option. I think it's great. Slacking. Another normal type that debuted in Gen 3. And this is a Pokemon famous for being terrible. It's pointed at and laughed at by many, but in its debut game of Gen 3, it's actually quite competitively viable, more than you would expect. Great players have used it to success, and I would even call it a little bit underrated. Slacking has the ability Truant, which is an active detriment. It means that you can't act every other turn, so very easy to exploit this. it sucks to not be able to act as many times as you want, obviously. A Pokemon with Protect can completely 1v1 Slacking. A lot of ways to take advantage of this. But of course, Slacking has the stats of a damn legendary with 150 HP, a massive 160 base attack, and really good speed too, considering these stats, 100. So the ability is designed to handicap Slacking from being too broken, of course. It's got great stats, but an ability that hinders it. But Slacking can actually be quite effective because you can just attack, switch out, switch back in, attack, and use it like that, like a one hit and run type strategy. And Slacking is one of the hardest things to switch in against in the entire game. Slacking's stab boosted return deals pretty ridiculous damage to everything. Some players even go for double edge to just maximize the amount that you deal. And this is when normal type feels like a pretty good offensive advantage. This is pretty nice neutral damage against just about everything. You have good complementary moves for your normal stab too. Earthquake hits steel types. Shadow Ball hits ghost types like Gengar. Focus Punch, if you're predictive, can hit steel types even harder and even threaten Skarmory, who is immune to Earthquake. Skarmory takes something like 70% or so from a Choice Band boosted Focus Punch, which is really significant. So you think of all the defensive switch-ins to physical attackers, all of them have some way to be punished by Slacking, whether it's a neutral double edge against an incoming Swampert, or an Earthquake against a incoming Registeel or something, or a Focus Punch on the incoming Skarmory. Slacking in the hands of the gamer is one of the scariest things in the entire game. And people have built around this Pokemon in interesting ways. It's actually a good lead because it has great speed, forces out Tyranitar and Zapdos turn 1, and puts the enemy in an awkward position too, where if they guess wrong, they're losing a Pokemon. So nice aggressive lead. Can be nice with Wish support to heal it back up and take advantage of its bulk. Can also work well on Magneton offense teams, as you can eliminate Skarmory and allow it to more safely spam its normal stab against various targets. So yeah, very cool Pokemon that is generally not a viable choice in most games, but in Gen 3, it actually is, amazingly. Linoone also exists. Hello, Linoone. This is not a very good Pokemon or commonly seen Pokemon at all, but can be built around sometimes, and it's a pretty fun one. A rare instance of normal typing actually having an offensive benefit as well. Linoone is the only guy in the game that can get the combination of Belly Drum and Stab Extreme Speed, which actually work quite well together. Belly Drum, of course, halves your health, but will maximize your attack, and most of the time this is not worth it because you also need speed to sweep. That's why Dragon Dance is quite popular, because you get attack and speed in one, help you sweep by outrunning things you need to hit, but Extreme Speed has priority on it, so it's a great way to take advantage of Belly Drum. You can get the maximum possible attack ever, and then hit him with a big priority move that actually hits very hard, about the same amount of power as non-priority moves. Extreme Speed is a very sought-after move that many Pokemon wish they could get. Linoone is blessed with such an option, and that alone makes it semi-viable. I mean, the stats are very unimpressive, but this combination of moves here give it value. You, of course, run some coverage to complement you, because you can't rely solely on normal type attacks, as they are blocked by ghosts and resisted by steals, but you run Hidden Power Ground to hit fellas like Metagross, and Shadow Ball to hit Gengar. This requires a lot of support though. You need Magneton to take out Skarmory, otherwise, look at this set, Skarmory totally destroys you. And often it's run alongside a Gardevoir, because Gardevoir has Memento, and that will more reliably allow Linoone the free turn required to Belly Drum by providing it with a shield against incoming hits thanks to the stat lowering effect of Memento. It's an interesting Pokemon, an interesting puzzle to potentially solve. Maybe there's a Linoone team out there that has what it takes to compete with the best. The Vapakuno team did quite well for a bit, but then people figured it out, and generally it's a bit inconsistent, but it's an interesting idea. It's got potential, doesn't it? In Generation 4, the first ever normal type legendary Pokemon was released, Arceus, the god of all Pokemon apparently. And Arceus in its base form is a normal type, but has the multi-type ability with specific plate items such as, I don't know, the Splash Plate. You can transform it to different types like water and fire and whatever else. But Arceus in its base form has the benefit of using whatever item it wants to, meaning its base form is actually quite good, and it can take advantage of its typing offensively and defensively. Being neutrally good is useful on a Pokemon with such good bulk. It has 120 base stats in everything, and can take advantage of the good old E-Killer combination, as it's called, the Swords Dance Extreme Speed set, which is a common fixture of many Ubers formats. In Gen 4 Ubers, this was actually a bit too overwhelming, a bit too overpowered for the time, and it's banned to anything goes in the format, regrettably. Arceus is actually my favorite legendary. I love its versatility. I love that it can be any type. It can fill any role, fill any gap. It's got a wonderful move pool. It's got Recover, Calm Mind, Swords Dance. It's got everything. It can be anything. It gets Defog later. It gets Refresh if you want to heal status. It gets so many random things, like I think it gets Overheat. Yeah, it gets Overheat. Grass Knot. Yeah, I mean, such a vast move pool. I love a vast move pool. Despite being too overwhelming for its first generation when it debuted, from Gen 5 onwards it was a part of Ubers, and a good one I think, that added variety and a nice central presence that I think makes Ubers special in later games. Gen 4 is where normal type really started to feel much worse in my opinion, with the rise of so much more fighting type damage, with moves like close combat and superpower becoming more commonplace. The higher base power of moves, meaning a neutral defensive typing is not as good when you can just get blown through by strong stab damage more often now, and effects like Life Orb and Choice Specs exacerbate that further. And the physical special split was not great for normal types. One of the best things about normal types previously was they are not weak to any special attacks, because fighting type could not be special back in Gen 3, 2, and 1, but now they can. They're vulnerable to Focused Blast and Aura Sphere, new fighting type special attacks that now exist. So it's an example of the physical special split having a detrimental effect on a defensive typing. But regardless, there is one normal type who rose to significant stardom in Gen 4 over time. You'll notice that this thing is ranked in UU, but it's actually the best normal type in all of Gen 4, and that is Clefable. People didn't realize it when Gen 4 was current, but now, as they've perhaps gained wisdom over the years and realized how good Magic Guard is, they've understood the truth of Clefable and how powerful this fella actually is in reality. Magic Guard is one of the best abilities in all of Pokemon, perhaps the best, granting you a complete immunity to all indirect damage. You're immune to Sandstorm damage, Hazard damage, Toxic, Leech Seed, Spikes, anything that isn't a direct attack. You know what's interesting about Magic Guard in Gen 4 is that it's actually even more powerful than it would be later, because in Gen 4 it also makes you immune to full paralysis. I don't know why, but it also grants you an immunity to that, so even paralysis won't affect Magic Guard Pokemon that much. So Clefable, despite having very unimpressive stats overall, especially in a power-crept world, the fact that it just evades everything and is pretty difficult to actually nail down and eliminate makes Clefable a top-tier Pokemon. And normal typing is good enough on such a fella, with some of those neutral benefits of normal typing still remaining relevant here. Clefable's other traits are doing most of the heavy lifting, particularly Magic Guard and its incredible move pool. It does have reliable healing in the form of Soft Boiled. It's got so many utility options too, like Thunder Wave to inflict paralysis, Knock Off to remove an item. Can also go Calm Mind to use it as a win condition if you like. It gets a great offensive move pool with coverage like Thunderbolt and Ice Beam, which are fantastic. Also gets Wish if you want to use it to heal up your allies. That's an option too. And it gets Stealth Rock, the best hazard in the game. That's unbelievable. That's incredible. So yeah, Clefable is an excellent Pokemon in Gen 4 OU. From Gen 6 onwards, Clefable would no longer be a normal type, but for now it is a normal type and it is great. Blissey is of course still effective as a special wall, but this is a world where the power levels increase significantly and feels a bit easier to beat down and punish Blissey. Blissey did get access to Stealth Rock, which is a significant buff. Great new option to just allow Blissey to set a hazard on the field, but generally Clefable is preferable despite its inferior bulk. Just sidestepping sand and hazards and toxic and effects like this makes you so much sturdier long term. Blissey definitely gets worn down by all the Stealth Rock, and even Spikes teams that use like Hippowdon and Skarmory can spam Spikes and give Blissey a big target on its back. But Blissey, of course, is still way better than Clefable as a special wall. And against enemies like Latias with Draco Meteor or Life Orb or Choice Spec Zapdos, any really hard-hitting special wall breaker, Blissey will be able to manage quite well. Snorlax has also fallen off significantly. Still OU by technicality, meaning it was OU back when Gen 4 was current, but in the modern day, not very popular anymore. Clefable and Blissey just feel better, and the Curse Snorlax set doesn't feel as good when hard-hitting and high base power fighting type attacks do exist now. Snorlax could outpace fighting types in the past, but now it's a bit more difficult to do so. So those Curse Rest passive Snorlax sets don't really work in this metagame. This set is from Smogon, and it's a good display of like how Snorlax has to operate now. Much more proactive with Lumberry for temporary value. You're not aiming to stick around very long with Snorlax usually, and you want like just attacks and self-destruct to at least trade with something. Snorlax can also get Pursuit Pursuit, which comes in handy. That's kind of cool, but obviously not as good as other Pursuit users like Tyranitar. Yeah, unfortunate to see Snorlax dipping so low now after a couple generations in a row of metagame relevance and even dominance. Now Snorlax is feeling honestly pretty bad and hard to justify using over other Pokemon in Gen 4. But Porygon 2 still feels cool in Gen 4, folks. I quite like this Pokemon in Gen 4. I think it's got a lot of cool new applications with Trace. The Dugtrio thing is no longer a factor because Dugtrio is banned in Gen 4. So no Arena Trap, but Trace can operate against more things now. The big one is Heatran. Heatran has Flash Fire, so you can come in and Trace Flash Fire and be totally immune to their fire type attacks, which is really useful. Heatran is a powerful Pokemon that can seriously tear apart teams if you're not prepared, so that's always great. Porygon 2 also excellent into Gyarados, who became much better with the physical special split, allowing it to use physical water type attacks. Porygon 2 can Trace Intimidate, which it couldn't back in Gen 3. Now you can Trace Intimidate, lowering the enemy's attack, and that obviously shields you against incoming physical damage, and you can hit them with the easy Thunderbolt to just one-hit KO their Gyarados. Same deal with Dragonite. Even though you don't Trace Intimidate, you can usually stomach the incoming hit and hit them with the Ice Beam if you want to deal with that. Porygon 2 can also trace Flygon's Levitate like it could in Gen 3, but Flygon is even more popular in Gen 4. It's become a much better Pokemon with the buffing of dragon type attacks, so that is a more relevant thing to have access to. There is also a new Porygon released in Generation 4, Porygon Z, who is much more offensively oriented than Porygon 2 was, with a massive special attack stat and the ability Adaptability, which grants bonus stab damage. Also has Download, which can give you an attack or special attack boost based on the foe's weaker defensive stat. It's an alright Pokemon. It's UUBL ranked in Gen 4. I don't think it's very commonly seen in competitive though. There are other special attackers with more to offer. A normal typing isn't very good offensively or defensively. It's neutral, so not a great fit on a specially offensive leaning Pokemon to just be mono normal. You do have the hard hitting Adaptability Stab Tri-Attack, which is nice, which you can boost further with a Nasty Plot, but not a great Pokemon. Can do some stuff sometimes. In Gen 5, normal typing really feels like it dropped off a cliff. I mean, from here on out, it's pretty much just pink blob looking guys as relevant normal types in OU. Snorlax is all the way down in the depths. Tauros basically doesn't even exist anymore. Normal typing is not good enough in the modern world, where the power level is higher. And Blissey has aged well, all things considered, because its normal typing is still a good fit on its for its stats. It is still neutral to most special attacks in the game, and functions very well in its defensive role. Unfortunately, in Gen 5, a Pokemon called Keldeo exists, who has a fighting type special attack that deals damage to the enemy's defense stat, called Secret Sword. So that's kind of a disaster for Blissey. One of the most popular special attackers just having a move that hits you on the defensive side, which you suck in and is super effective. But in spite of that, Blissey is still seeing pretty common use in tournaments on mostly stall teams for its positive matchup into a wide array of special attackers and special threats like Thundurus, Therian, Latios, etc. There was once a time where Stoutland was actually a dominant force in Gen 5 OU, but that was in the before times. Because Stoutland used to be a good choice on sand teams with Sand Rush, which doubles your speed when Sandstorm is active, and with a Choice Band equipped and a massive speed stat, you could actually be quite threatening with just Stab Return. Got decent coverage too, with like superpower to hit Tyranitar or steel types like Ferrothorn. I remember laddering with this guy quite a lot back in Gen 5 when it was current, but at some point they actually banned Sand Rush entirely. Sand Rush cannot be used anymore. It is pretty broken in a world with permanent weather to have these speed doubling effects, so I do understand. But part of me misses Stoutland. I remember succeeding with this back in the day. One of the first teams I ever succeeded with competitively, perhaps because it was just brain dead. You just go to your guy and click a button. But I had fun with it anyway. I had fun with the large dog. I enjoy this Pokemon. Chansey has some competitive viability now, even though it's a not fully evolved Pokemon and Blissey has higher stats. The new item Eviolite exists, which is an item that can only be used by not fully evolved Pokemon. And when equipped, it increases your defense and special defense by 1.5 times. And you'll notice that Chansey, its stats are mostly pretty similar to Blissey's. Like, most not fully evolved Pokemon are way worse than their fully evolved form, but Chansey's pretty close. Blissey has slightly higher special defense, higher special attack, but you don't necessarily need that. So the extra defensive boost you get from Eviolite is quite significant. Makes Chansey actually pretty worth using on the right teams for the enhanced bulk it offers. And much like in Gen 4, Clefable has application because of its Magic Guard ability, which is just as useful in Gen 5. I mean, some of the most central Pokemon in the game have Magic Guard, like Alakazam and Reuniclus, and Clefable still has value, even though it's not as powerful as those Pokemon in terms of its stats. It's good neutral typing with normal, it's great utility options, it can set Stealth Rock, it has Encore, which is useful against enemy boost sweepers like Reuniclus, it's got Knockoff to remove items. And what's nice about Clefable, it fits on both Sand teams and Hail teams because it just ignores all weather residual damage. So Hail teams commonly use Clefable as a defensive Pokemon that is not at a disadvantage from the Hail chip damage. Clefable has had a bit of a renaissance in Gen 5, in fact, recently, being a common fixture of defensive-leaning teams, and it's easy to see why. In Gen 6, there is actually a new Ubers-ranked normal-type Pokemon, Let's Go Kangaskhan Mega, proving that the normal type can be powerful occasionally. Mega Kangaskhan is one of the strongest megas in the game, with its ability Parental Bond. This is a controversial ability where a child comes out of the kangaroo pouch and actually fights alongside its mother. I don't know if that should be allowed, but that's neither here nor there. And with the Parental Bond, basically the little guy will hit the same move that you use, but slightly less powerful. But that has a really interesting application with Power Up Punch, allowing you to gain the attack boost twice, which is damn good. It's basically Swords Dance while attacking at the same time, and you generally just have a lot of damage output with your double hits on everything. So yeah, it turned out this was a little bit too overwhelming. It even has Fake Out for double priority hit. That's pretty powerful. I don't think it's that good in Ubers, unfortunately. I mean, the power level is quite high in Ubers. I don't know if this quite cuts it, but it was too overwhelming for OU, and it was banned. And another one of the best megas in the entire game was actually a normal type, Mega Lopunny, who is one of the best physical threats you can use in this game, with its massive speed stat, really great attack stat, and the ability Scrappy, which actually makes normal type very good offensively. Thanks to Scrappy, normal and fighting type attacks can actually hit ghost types. It cancels out their immunity, so that makes Fake Out and Return really spammable and good neutral attacking types. In Generation 6, there's also a mechanic where the Mega Form does not actually have the speed stat of its Mega Form on the first turn that a Mega evolves, if that makes sense. The first turn that you Mega Evolve, you share the same speed stat that your base form has. So in some situations, that's a pretty bad detriment when your base form is really slow, but your Mega Form is really fast. But because Mega Lopunny has Fake Out, which has priority on it, and has a 100% flinch chance, it has a safe way to enable its Mega Evolution and gain the speed that it needs. So that's quite good. And it's also normal type damage, imagine that cannot be blocked by ghosts. It's actually one of my favorite Mega Evolutions to use in Gen 6 and 7. Really consistent offensive threat that is just a good use of the Mega Stone, always quite solid. The Fake Out is useful to allow you to finish off enemy boost sweepers that might be getting out of control. You can like switch in, Fake Out, switch back out, switch in, Fake Out to deal with annoying enemies. Chansey is OU ranked in Gen 6 while Blissey isn't. I guess the Eviolite is a bit more valuable than the other item slots on Blissey for the enhanced defense. So that's cool. Let's go Chansey. Bit of a Gen 1 throwback there. As far as other normal types in Gen 6, I mean, there are some that are UUBL ranked that you might see, but they're not great. Let's be honest. We've got Diggersby, a new huge power Pokemon, a normal ground type Pokemon. And this can be a decent breaker. Huge power allows you to achieve really high attack stats because it doubles all the EVs and bonus stats from natures. So this will go up to like 464, I believe. That's a big attack stat. It's got Swords Dance Quick Attack, so that's something. That's priority normal type stab damage, if you can believe it. And Return is quite hard hitting. I will say that normal typing having the ghost immunity feels a bit more relevant now. There are more ghost type attacks to worry about, so maybe that is a point of entry for Diggersby to get on the field, I suppose. And then there's Mega Pidgeot, a normal flying type Pokemon, with the ability No Guard, meaning that its moves and its opponent's moves cannot miss, which greatly enhances Hurricane, turning it from a very inaccurate and unreliable attack to a very spammable and great attack with infinite accuracy that cannot miss. Fortunately, Mega Pidgeot doesn't have the best stats for a Mega, with pretty poor bulk still and not quite enough speed to really pose much of a threat to things. It doesn't feel worth using the Mega Stone on this when something like Mega Lopunny is more consistent and threatening. Even Mega Alakazam or Mega Metagross are just better choices. But it's alright. It's okay. I quite like it. I think it's cool. I do wish it was a little bit better in the stats, but we can't have everything that we want, can we? Gen 7 is pretty much exactly the same as Gen 6 in terms of viable normal types, regrettably. The only OU ranked ones are still just Chansey and Megalopunny, and then the same UUBLs with Diggersby. Mega Pidgeot is even demoted to UU. This is a tragedy, isn't it, folks? I think Beware was a new normal type introduced in Gen 7, but this is not very good, is it? Normal type is starting to feel much worse now. This is not fun at all. What happened to when normal type was the best? Normal type is feeling less than average at the moment. In Gen 8, something very controversial happened. A Zigzagoon appears to have joined a gang. I don't know if I agree with this morally, but Obstagoon exists, a dark normal type Pokemon. And it's interesting, I didn't know this until just now. This has a niche in Ubers because it can switch in against Calyrex Shadow. It is immune to Psychic and Ghost, which are Calyrex Shadow's 2 stab types. So you can come in and then you get Guts Flame Orb and you can do stuff. You can switcheroo the Flame Orb to something. You got Knockoff, that's a great click. That's interesting, normal typing coming in handy. Facade also has normal type stab on it with a Guts Flame Orb boost for as much damage as possible. I'm proud of Obstagoon for being able to do this because there's not many normal types to speak of here, truly. There's not much going on, but Obstagoon has got a role for itself in the Ubers format. And I think that's quite interesting. Blissey is now back to OU status, defeating Chansey. Chansey can go back down to where it belongs because Blissey now has access to the Heavy Duty Boots item, a new item introduced in Gen 8. Patching up Blissey's arguably biggest downside, its vulnerability to hazard chip damage. Now Blissey is totally immune to Stealth Rock and Spikes, wearing it down so much over the course of a game. Blissey also got a cool buff. Teleport was redesigned in Gen 8 to be a pivoting effect with negative priority. So Blissey can take advantage of its bulk to do a slow pivot and take the hit for whatever frail offensive threat you have as a teammate. You take the hit and then you switch to them safely. They are completely unharmed as they enter the field. That made Blissey significantly better, didn't it? Gen 9, on the other hand, did release some very powerful normal types, 2 of which ended up getting banned to Ubers. Was of course the new Terrapagos legendary, which was really running rampant in OU for a brief time, and an interesting Pokemon design. It's very confusing. It has a base form that's a little baby turtle, and then as soon as it switches in, it becomes this form, which is effectively its base form. The original turtle form is there for flavor reasons. But yeah, so this is basically the base form. And its ability Terra Shell is kind of like multi-scale but better. If you're at full HP, attacks used against you will always be not very effective, unless you're immune to them like ghost type attacks. This is even better than multi-scale because it bypasses multi-hit effects, like, I don't know, Tail Slap, those moves with multiple hits on them. The first hit will usually break multi-scale, and then the next hits in the chain will deal full damage to your multi-scale Pokemon, but it's not the case for Terrapagos with Terra Shell, because all of the hits of the multi-hit move will be not very effective against Terrapagos. And with this free turn and really excellent defensive stats, it can start setting up. The common set in OU while it was legal was this, Rock Polish and Calm Mind together, double dancing, and it also has this signature move here, Terra Starstorm, which is just a really hard-hitting special attacking normal move, but if you Terrastalize into the Stellar type, Terra Starstorm becomes a Stellar type attack, meaning it is neutral to everything and also deals super effective damage to enemies that have Terrastalized, which is a unique effect of Stellar type moves. And when Terrapagos Terrastalizes into the Stellar type, it also transforms into a new form, Terrapagos Stellar form, where it has these excellent legendary level stats. Massive HP, massive special attack, great defenses, and a new ability, Terraform 0, which ends the effects of all weather and terrain. So like Koraidon's Sun, Miraidon's Electric Terrain, all get ended. It's kind of like anti-Miraidon and Koraidon design. A bit like how Rayquaza cancels out the weather of Groudon and Kyogre. A similar concept where Terrapagos cancels out the weather and terrain of its legendary counterparts. Unfortunately, this is not a very good Pokemon in Ubers, but it is pretty nice in Ubers UU, which is a new format that exists in Gen 9. The in-between point of OU and Ubers, where a lot of Pokemon lie now because there are just so many Pokemon banned from OU that aren't good enough for Ubers, enough to make a whole tier in between. So in that format, Terrapagos is quite solid. And then we have Ursaluna Blood Moon, another Uber's ranked normal type Pokemon with the ability Mind's Eye, which is basically Scrappy, the same thing as Scrappy. It also has the added benefit of immunity to accuracy lowering, but I don't think that ever comes up really. The big thing is that your normal type moves can hit Ghost, and Blood Moon Ursaluna has one of the craziest normal type attacks ever made. Blood Moon, which has 140 base power. It has a similar effect to Gigaton Hammer where you can't use it twice in a row. If you use it once, you can't use it the next turn. But that's not much of a detriment because the counterplay to this is very limited. And you also have the perfect complementary coverage of ground with earth power. Since ghost types are not safe from Blood Moon, the only other types that might be are steel or rock types who resist normal, but you have earth power to just hit them. Another great option that you have is Vacuum Wave for a priority fighting type attack. You also have Calm Mind to boost yourself up to a point where you are indestructible, and I haven't even talked about the guy's stats yet. They are through the roof, with great HP, huge special attack, and really high defense as well. And Calm Mind also fills the gap of your lower special defense. You can boost up your special defense with this move, patching up your one exploitable weakness. So yeah, this was a very overwhelming Pokemon in OU. I think it's alright in Ubers too. Ground typing is nice for the electric immunity it provides, and I'm sure it still hits pretty hard against the common Pokemon within Ubers, and normal ground actually pretty complementary, especially with the Scrappy effect. Probably not too central or anything, but I could see this being Ubers viable in Gen 9. And in Gen 9 OU, regrettably, there's only a single OU ranked normal type, and it is Blissey, the Pokemon that has been the normal type champion for generations now. It is still OU. It did drop at previous points in Gen 9, but it rose back up to fill its ever-present role of the normal type special wall that has evidently aged pretty well. Blissey lost a lot of options in Gen 9. It lost Toxic, which is the most important one, the one thing that allowed it to actually apply pressure to things, but still functions as the most solid special wall in the game, and that's worth something still. Cyclizar once ran rampant as the all-new best competitive normal type in the game for a time. Cyclizar is a dragon normal type Pokemon with the ability Regenerator, which is one of the best abilities you can get. And even though its stats are pretty unimpressive, what made Cyclizar so good was this move right here, Shed Tail, which is one of the craziest moves for competitive singles that has ever existed. At the cost of half of your HP, you are able to create a substitute and then baton pass that substitute to a teammate. Cyclizar can obviously shrug off the half HP it takes because as it switches out, it is healing back with Regenerator. And then once you pass to a teammate, you are basically pivoting while getting a free turn of complete safety for whatever comes in. And this was extremely overpowered on hyper offense teams built around boost sweepers like Volcarona. At the time, Annihilate was also allowed. Eventually, the move Shed Tail was banned completely from the game for its uncompetitive nature, its uninteractive nature. And it just turned the game into a absolute Shed Tail spam fest, which wasn't fun. And with Shed Tail banned, Cyclizar's best tool was gone, and it is now relegated to the RU tier. The guy still has pretty nice utility options, it's just got pretty poor stats and defensive typing. It was pretty much just this one move making it so powerful. Ursaluna, another new normal type available in Gen 9 from the Legends Arceus video game, and for a time this was quite an overwhelming presence. With Swords Dance and Facade, along with Guts. This is some of the hardest hitting normal type damage we have ever seen. It has a massive 140 attack that gets even higher with Guts, and with a Terra normal, you can even power through resists like Corviknight. Ground is pretty nice complementary coverage, and Fire Punch also quite good to hit not only Corviknight but even Goldengo with a balloon or something like that might be able to thwart the headlong rush. Regrettably, Ursaluna does suffer from its lower speed, and no priority moves or anything to make up for its low speed. And there are other bulky offensive ground types with more utility, like Great Tusk specifically is a big one. Normal typing is kind of useful because it offers Ghost immunity in the defensive department, which can help against Goldengo and Dragapult, but you do hate being weak to fighting when Great Tusk is so central, so that's another detrimental point about Ursaluna. This was popular initially on Trick Room teams because Trick Room inverts the speed stat, allowing slower Pokemon to move first, which pretty good with this Pokemon here who is so slow, but that's an exploitable strategy in Gen 9 competitive singles because Trick Room just only lasts for 5 turns. It's very easily just stalled out, and it's not a reliable way to apply offense. You'd rather just use something fast, not requiring such setup that is temporary. Trick Room a much better concept in doubles than it is in singles, so that was short-lived. Still a decent Pokemon though, you could still use it on OU teams, I think, and build around it. It's got desirable traits, but turned out to be overhyped in the beginning, and as people figured the metagame out, its flaws started to rise to the surface. Hisuian Zoroark actually did have a brief stint in OU. The first ever normal Ghost type, which is actually an excellent type combination, because Ghost is weak to Ghost itself, but Normal offers a Ghost immunity. So Hisuian Zoroark only has one weakness to Dark and multiple useful immunities. Ghost also complements Normal by cancelling out its weakness to Fighting, because Ghost is immune to Fighting. So Zoroark Hisui has a lot of opportunity to hit the field with this great typing that offers so many immunities, and it has a pretty nice move pool too, with the signature move Bitter Malice, which is a Ghost type move that lowers the enemy's attack by 1. You got Calm Mind, Hyper Voice for normal stab, etc. And you have the ability Illusion, of course, just like the original Zoroark, which allows you to disguise as a teammate. Can be useful when you have so many immunities. Maybe you disguise as like King Gambit. They think they can hit you with a fighting type attack. Surprise, I'm Zoroark. I'm immune actually. But there's some application to that. Regrettably though, Zoroark Hisui is frail and pretty easy to just eliminate with good old neutral attacks because it can't survive that many hits. It's also kind of outclassed by the other two ghosts in the format, Dragapult and Goldengo, who are overall much more desirable. The illusion thing is a bit of a gimmick. Maybe you can catch someone, but they can see that you have Zoroark in the team preview, so they can see through your disguise oftentimes, and the kinds of Pokemon that you want to disguise as can be pretty obvious, like King Gambit, because it is weak to the thing Zoroark is immune to, so that can be telegraphed and easy to play around, oftentimes. Indeedee was introduced in the past, but has become an actual member of OU now, primarily because Tapu Lele no longer exists, who was previously the superior Psychic Terrain setter, but now Indeedee is all we've got as a Psychic Terrain setter, and interestingly, Normal Psychic, pretty good typing, because Psychic is weak to Ghost, but Normal is immune to Ghost. Psychic is resistant to Fighting as well, which helps out Normal type, making you now neutral to Fighting. So good typing, but bad stats overall. Still sometimes worth using for the Psychic Terrain, which boosts Psychic type damage and makes everything grounded on the field immune to Priority, which can support teammates like Stored Power Iron Crown or Stored Power Poltegeist, Armarouge, certain things like this, which have seen some use throughout the metagame's history. And finally, my favorite new normal type in a while, and a Pokemon that I think is actually kind of underrated in Gen 9 OU, is Mousehold. Every mouse has its household. What a wonderful family. This family of mice is a singular entity that is normal type. It's got the ability Technician, which is a great offensive ability, granting a power boost of 1.5 times to moves with 60 power or less. Mousehold's stats are unimpressive except the speed, which is sort of not bad. What makes Mousehold so good is, of course, this move right here, Population Bomb, which hits 10 times. Each hit has 20 base power, which is multiplied by Technician to 30 base power, and 30 power times 10 hits, effectively 300 base power, which is absurdly strong. There is a catch though, and that is the fact that it has 90 accuracy, and if any of the hits miss, the move stops. So if you hit 2 of them, and then the third one misses, you don't get any more hits. It just ends. For this reason, you kind of need to run Wide Lens on this Pokemon to maximize your accuracy and allow you to hit Population Bomb as many times as possible, but can be very worthwhile. Tidy Up, another signature move on Mousehold. Well, was once a signature move. They gave it to more Pokemon later, like Furret, I think, gets it. But a rare move, which is basically Dragon Dance but better, raises your attack and speed, and then clears hazards from the field completely and substitute from the field completely. Very, very good move. Like, good enough to give Mousehold some value, because it is notably a way to remove hazards that is not blocked by Goldengo. Goldengo can block Defog from happening, and thanks to its ability Good as Gold, and that's something that teams are built around, abusing Goldengo to maintain hazards on the field. But Tidy Up, because it's not applying an effect to Goldengo, Goldengo cannot block it. It's a boost that just applies an effect to the whole field rather than a specific Pokemon. So that's great, and that is a very reliable form of hazard removal, which is important if you're running vulnerable teammates that suck against hazards. So you've got that up your sleeve, and you can boost up your Population Bomb at the same time. Bite has decent coverage, it's not a great attack, but at least it lets you hit ghost types. And Encore comes in handy all the time in Gen 9 OU actually, because it's great against King Gambit, who oftentimes wants to click either Swords Dance or Sucker Punch, both of which get punished by Encore. You repeat any of those moves and you are just left completely useless, so having Encore is really nice. Also helps out in many miscellaneous situations against anything using healing or any boosting move, really. Mousehold's biggest downside is that it gets really destroyed by Rocky Helmet because each of these hits of Population Bomb do make contact. And if you hit something with a Rocky Helmet on, you actually just faint to all the residual damage from Rocky Helmet. You get hit by Rocky Helmet 10 times and then you are staring down the void and your family has been torn apart by a simple yellow helmet. It's very tragic, but it's the reality of the situation we live in. So that sucks for Mousehold. Probably should be paired with like knockoff users that lure in Corviknight, maybe Rillaboom or something that can do such a thing. Get rid of that Rocky Helmet so that Population Bomb is more spammable. But I like Mousehold. Despite its shortcomings, I think it's cool. And normal typing is feeling kind of nice. It at least gives it some pivot entry points against the occasional Dragapult and Goldengo who click ghost type attacks. Like that comes up a little bit more often now. Even though you're neutrally vulnerable to a lot of other powerful hits, you at least have that going for you. And that does it for the normal types in competitive Pokemon. There's a very significant dip over time, isn't there, where it's basically just Blissey and nothing else, and the occasional other normal types are fringe viable at best and not very good. I think a powerful neutral defensive typing was a good concept early on, especially with not that many powerful high base power attacks in the game yet, and especially fighting type attacks in particular being very limited in the early generations. But as time went on, normal types were under more fire, and that concept of just being good neutrally is no longer that good. You want to have useful resistances. You want to function within the metagame by having an answer to common hits, and normal types do not offer that. They also kind of suck offensively sometimes, where Steel and Rock types resist them, and they're so common, and then Ghost types are immune, and Ghost has only risen over time as well. But what do you think of the normal type? Are you neutral towards it? Do you believe it's, in fact, quite normal? And who is your favorite normal type of all time? Mine would have to be, I suppose, it's a tie between Dodrio and Porygon 2. Dodrio for sentimental value, Porygon 2 for game design. But what about you folks? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.